welcome to another short box from Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Zeckthar, and this week we'll be talking about the end of the founding of the Empire, which is called the Great Scouring. Well, folks, it seems like we have reached the end of our discussing of the Great Scouring. This week we shall talk about the Iron Hands and the Blood Angels, as promised, and then I shall give my final thoughts on this interesting and chaotic time in the history of the Imperium Man. So, let's start with the Blood Angels.
Now for the Blood Angels, the division of the Second Founding was a cruel double blow. Their Primarch, Sanguinius, was dead, slain at Horus's own hand in the final moments of the heresy, and now, without time to grieve their father nor recoup the terrible casualties suffered in the Siege of Terra, this close-knit fraternity was to be sundered. The survivors lacked an obvious leader, and worse still, the first signs of their flaw, known as the Red Thirst, were beginning to manifest within the ranks of the Legion. It is fair to say that the Blood Angels' encounters with the Scions of Chaos had left the Legionnaires scarred, and the horror of their master's death was a visceral wound upon their souls. Since fighting against the demons of Khorne and Slaanesh at Cygnus Prime, the nascent thirst had awoken within the Legion, and the aftershocks of Sanguinius' death at the hands of the War Master had cursed their souls with what would be known as the Black Rage. Though the heresy was over, for the Blood Angels, the greatest trial was just beginning. Now, before we continue, a little background on this defect known as the Red Thirst and Black Rage. The Blood Angels and all the Space Marines of their successor chapters generally have pale skin, moderately elongated canine teeth, and a strong urge to drink the blood of their enemies, which can grow stronger over the solar decades of their service, eventually causing degeneration into uncontrollable madness. This is what is known as the Red Thirst. Deep within the psyche of every Blood Angel and every bearer of their Primarch Sanguinius' genetic legacy is a destructive yearning, a battle fury and blood hunger that must be held in abeyance in every waking moment. Few battle brothers can hold this Red Thirst in check unceasingly. It is far from unknown for the Blood Angels to temporarily succumb to its lure at the height of battle. The Red Thirst is the Blood Angels' darkest secret and greatest curse, but it is also their greatest salvation, for it brings with it a humility and understanding of their own failings, which make them truly the most noble of the Space Marines. Yet the Red Thirst is one of two genetic flaws to be found in the gene seed of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. The second is known as the Black Rage. Now, the Black Rage, also known as the flaw of Sanguinius, is the result of the psychic imprint left by their Primarch Sanguinius' death at the hands of Horus during the Siege of Terra. The Blood Angels are unique amongst the Space Marines in that deeply ingrained in their gene seed is the encoded experience of their Primarch, and most deeply imprinted of all is the memory of Sanguinius' final battle with Horus. Sometimes, on the eve of battle, an event or circumstance will trigger this genetic memory, and the battle brother's mind is suddenly wrenched into the distant past. The Black Rage overcomes the Blood Angel, as the memories and the consciousness of Sanguinius intrude upon his mind. This can cause Blood Angel Astartes to go insane prior to or during battle and feel the uncontrollable rage of Sanguinius himself during the final days of the Siege of Terra. The condition is largely irrecoverable, and only a few Blood Angels have managed to overcome the flaw. Victims are locked away in the Tower of the Lost, on the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal, in their fortress monastery complex of the Arx Angelicum. A warrior overcome with the Black Rage appears half-mad with fury. He is unable to distinguish past from present and does not recognize his comrades. He may believe he is Sanguinius upon the eve of his destruction, and the bloody battles of the Horus heresy are still raging all around him. Such a battle brother stands at the end of his travels, for his path leads only to the Death Company, where he and the chapter's other damned souls will fight one final battle in Sanguinius' name. Rather than let their afflicted brethren face a slow, insane death, the Blood Angels and their successors will form those of their battle brothers who have newly succumbed to the Black Rage into a special unit of the chapter known as the Death Company. They wear specially painted black power armor, dabbed with red crosses to symbolize the wounds of Sanguinius, and are often led by a few chapter officers, notably chaplains, who are able to communicate orders to the insane troops. They are then sent out to perform the most dangerous assaults, hoping for a quick and honorable death in combat. Now that you have an understanding of the genetic flaws of the Blood Angels, I think we can now continue on to what the chapter did during the Great Scouring. As the chapter came to grips with the understanding of these flaws, as well as the sorrow and tragedy of losing their father, Gilliman hit them with the new orders of the Codex Astartes, and more importantly, they were decreed to split up their legion into the second founding. While each legion worked out for itself how to divide, the sons of Sanguinius were at last united by the sole survivor of the Sanguinian Guard, Ascelion. Accounts from this time differ greatly, but all concur that at Ascelion's council, the survivors of the legion formed a small number of chapters, commanded by the champions of the Blood Angels. Each took on the traditions and rites of their legion as the basis of their new brotherhood and adopting a fitting name. Thus began a time of rebuilding for the sons of Sanguinius, who separated to establish themselves as autonomous organizations. Notably, even in this time of disarray, the vengeful chapter master Nasir Amit, known by his peers as the Flesh Terror, led his newly formed chapter on a blood-soaked crusade to seek out and annihilate any vestige of the traitor legions. Their actions, even in the early years of the Flesh Terror's existence, laid the foundation upon which they would be known and judged ever after. Now, we did a little digging, and this chapter's crusade lasted some 200 years after the chapter's immediate founding. During this time, these Space Marines destroyed any heretics who crossed their path. Those they encountered, they defeated. Those they defeated, they utterly annihilated, leaving no stone left unturned and no living beings to continue any heresy. Some rumors circulated of their brutality, even going so far as to reach the High Lords of Terra. However, their degree of success in achieving compliancy was nearly unparalleled. During this period of strife of the Great Scouring, as the Imperium recovered from Horus's treachery, results were valued far more than technique. As such, there were no investigations into the savage rumors that accompanied the Flesh Terror's implacable advance. Yet over time, the Flesh Terrors continued to earn a reputation for savagery. These volatile Astartes reveled in each close assault action and continued to cause unacceptable levels of collateral damage. Some reports indicate that during their mad frenzies, the Flesh Terrors continued their battle actions against allied forces, or even against the innocent civilians whom they were assigned to protect. Now, as interesting as this second founding is, we do have to move on to the Iron Hands. Now remember, as opposed to the Blood Angels who lost their father at the end of the Horus Heresy, the Iron Hands lost Ferrus Manus at the beginning, when the Legion was all but destroyed in Esfand V. These events drove the Iron Hands to despair as they returned to their homeworld Medusa. This despair soon turned to anger against the Chaos Space Marines and other traitor legions, an anger which the Iron Hands began to use as a driving force to recover from the trauma of the Dropsite Massacre. Terrible scars were left upon the Legion's collective soul, and many among their number remained in denial about the death of their Primarch. And so, a gathering of clans and Iron Fathers on Medusa formed a new council to rule the Iron Hands now that the Primarch was lost. It was decided that no single individual would ever rule over the Iron Hands again. Instead, the Iron Council was fully established as the Iron Hands' new ruling body. It now fell to the Iron Council's members to collectively direct the fate of their brothers, and to consider their legion's greater purpose and responsibilities. While many Imperial factions bayed for blood and rushed to vent their fury upon those who had betrayed them, the Iron Hands gathered their strength on Medusa and convened the entire Iron Council in a conclave that would be forever known after as the Tempering. It goes without saying that vengeance would be their first and greatest motivator, for their legion had suffered more than any other during the bloodbath of the heresy. Yet anger could not be allowed to rule, for by following such a path, the mistakes of the Primarch would be repeated. Instead, the Iron Hands would have to calculate the most logical, measured course of action and follow it without remorse or division. This debate ran long. Days turned to weeks, and weeks into months, as all possible theories, doctrines, and philosophies were discussed and dissected into an obsessive degree. Occasional outbursts of frustration or angry shouts punctuated the discussion, each being met with universal disapproval and swift repression. Eventually, as the 86th day came to a close, the rulings of the Iron Council were announced and put into immediate effect. The Iron Fathers of the Council had determined that it was the human race itself that was to blame for the heresy. The War Master Horus's rebellion had gained such traction only because the Space Marine legions, the Primarchs, and even the Emperor himself were unable to eliminate human inconsistencies from their decisions. Jealousy, hate, fear, all were pulsating sores upon the human soul that must be seared clean in the fires of war. Trust, too, had played its part, for it was the Primarchs' trust in one another that had left the Imperium open to the abuses it had suffered. Those guilty of such weakness, the traitors and renegades who had fallen into rebellion, could not be allowed to spread their corruption to others. So it was that the Iron Hands determined their guiding mission. They would extract payment for the wrongs done to them, but with measured ruthlessness. In their every thought and deed, they would seek out weakness and destroy it, replacing it with the machine-like fortitude that they so venerated. The clan companies then took to the stars, forging into unstoppable strike forces and distributed against the most appropriate foes as determined by pure logic. This was the beginning of a bloody campaign that would see the Iron Hands tested to their very limits of their endurance. Now, unbeknownst to the wider Imperium, the Tempering also played host to several Adeptus Mechanicus envoys. And the devotees of the Omnissiah, the Iron Hands saw a mirror of their own doctrine of steel over flesh, a reliable ally who would not fall prey to the hubris and pride as had the preening braggarts of the Emperor's children. The Iron Council thus deemed it logical to offer the Adeptus Mechanicus closer military ties than ever before. In exchange for the Iron Hands' alliance and protection, the Martian priesthood would grant them unprecedented access to the sacred mysteries of the Omnissiah, augmenting their Tech Marines' knowledge far beyond that possessed by their counterparts in the other legions and Legiones Astartes. By the Tempering's end, the voice of Mars would be ratified as the official position upon the Iron Council itself, and would be occupied evermore by Triad as senior tech adepts. In the wake of the decrees laid down during the Tempering, the Second Founding soon followed, and the legions of the First Founding were divided into smaller formations known as chapters in accordance with the Codex Astartes. The surviving clan companies of the old 10th Legion were divided amongst the Iron Hands and their successor chapters, with the Iron Hands retaining the 10 great clans of Medusa for their own. Each Second Founding chapter initially shared their parent legion's gene seed. Subsequently, each chapter's gene seed was isolated by the Adeptus Mechanicus, forming new genetic lines. Because of the Space Marines that made up each of the Second Founding chapters originated from one of the Space Marine legions that first served the Emperor, the chapters that were created were called successor chapters, a title not given to later chapters of many of the subsequent foundings, that had been carried out by the Imperium after the initial split to keep the number at an extent chapters of around 1,000 across the galaxy. And so we come to the end of our little tale, and one must think on how important this time in history was. The formation of the Codex Astartes and the rise of the Astarte foundings would echo throughout the rest of human history, as well as the birth of the ecclesiarchy. During this time, we saw the loss of every loyal Primarch, leaving the Imperium to flounder under the rule of the High Lords of Terra, which would prove costly. Because of this, I believe that the true decay of the Imperium did not lay in the Horus Heresy, but at the end of the Great Scouring. Now just think for a second if Guilliman had defeated Fulgrim. By the time of the end of the Great Scouring, the Empire would have started a new, shining future. The ecclesiarchy would have been put in its place, and the High Lords of Terra would have to remain servants of the Empire, not greedy malcontents. Of course, who knows? Perhaps instead of a shining future, Guilliman would simply be a stop plug to the eventual decay of humanity. Regardless, the Great Scouring will go down in history as a hollow victory. Victory in the fact that they swiftly pushed back the forces of chaos and claimed much of their territory, yet burnt the pieces in play that would lead to the slow decay of the Empire. Well, one must ask, what will we be doing next week, now that we're done with the Great Scouring? Honestly, I think we will just keep going into the next part of the Imperium's history, yet perhaps the darker side of it. Next week I will start my long campaign of going through the first 7 Black Crusades, which will end at the end of the year. Stay tuned, as we will discuss everyone's favorite Black Legionnaire, Abaddon the Despoiler. If you enjoyed this Vox, please like, comment, subscribe, and follow. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.